Okay, today's the day we're finally gonna get moving on this old grinder. Try to get this thing ready. We're getting pretty low on pig feed, so it's getting to become the higher priority right now. That's how things go around here. You can see I peeled off the little bit of tin that they had bolted up and just peeled it back one layer. And you can see what a mess and how bad all that is. It's a real common thing on this type of thing with auger and thin tinware. I've seen this kind of thing on combines and other grain handling equipment, augers and things like that. And on these kind of grinders, it's real common. They start to wear out at the bottom, especially because they don't get fully cleaned out. And so then that grain that's in there and ground takes on moisture and it starts to rust through. And then the auger, as it's going after it's been put back into use, it's wearing on that new rust layer, which basically wears that right off and polishes up again. So it speeds up the process and it rusts right through. And the common fix every time is to slap some tin on the outside and bolt, screw it, cut, whatever it is, put it on, glue it, apparently here. But it doesn't fix the problem, because then what it does is it actually creates more of a pocket, because when you do it that way, you can't ever get this gap between the two sheets, between the existing and the new sheet. You can never get that. I've never seen it done where that gap is tight. So what ends up happening is that the material, the grain or whatever ground up, gets in between the layers and causes both layers to rust. So instead of just having a simple hole in the sheet, now you've got a hole in that sheet, and then you've got a catch point back here so the cancer spreads faster to everything else. Sure, it plugs the hole for now, but the new patch wears out faster than it should, because now it's got a spot for that grain to go into and pack in and then just rot out again. So then what do? They put another piece over the top of both pieces. And then again, the whole thing rusts out, because now you've got this huge pocket to catch everything. So it just makes everything rot. And the only way to fix it and not have it rot like that is to cut it off. A lot of times they make these parts, some of these things, replaceable, but I don't know a farmer that ever pays for those things to be replaced. Within reason, I guess. There's a couple of times I could think of a few spots where they finally do. On combines, you know. So it's probably 3 pieces originally. My guess is that this piece is replaceable and that piece is replaceable, and this piece is probably integrated. It feels welded here and welded here. So that part maybe not so much as a replaceable item. So the fix I'm going to do for this, I'm going to first start by taking some of this apart and see what components I have to work with. Some of these parts are probably still available, but I'm probably going to take these couple parts, like this belly and that belly, off and then just rebuild them with new steel. I'm going to come back up here a ways and I'm going to cut this off on the old tin, and I'll form a new belly, and then I'll weld that into place. I'll bend it and roll it so that it's got the right dimension of curve, and then we'll weld it back in and patch that up. There's a few spots where things like this, where the back of this plate, it's all rusted through here, and that's right here where this auger flighting is. You can see how the patch job in there. Maybe you can at this camera. You can see the layers over there, and then these layers beneath them. It's just the original, you can actually see is worn clean out, the original steel, and there's another layer of steel underneath that that's worn out, and there's, looks like 2 more layers underneath that are wearing and worn. The flighting is a little bit worn, so And it usually wears especially hard on the ends. Through the middle, they kind of hold intact, but it's always the ends of the augers that tend to wear out the fastest for some reason. So I'm probably going to take this auger apart and pull this hopper, which is all welded component, and we'll replace this mounting plate and the belly of this part, straighten out this other stuff, fix up the hinge over there, and kind of straighten out all the beat up parts a bit. That'll take care of this section. This section just bolts on, but I've got to take this separator off. This comes from the grinder. There's kind of a fan here that takes any of the small loose chaff on the initial grinding, the lightweight material, and blows it up through a separator to separate and create a downforce, and pumps it right back into the auger to feed into the tub. That helps kind of keep the grinder clean and keeps the airflow through there. But I'm going to have to unbolt some of that. And you can see they've had it taped up because it was probably bleeding out a little bit in here. You can see there's separation in the plate on the flange. There's old gasket material in here that's kind of falling out and stuff. And a few places where they taped a few things. So we'll probably end up having to unbolt all this and straighten out, patch up, do whatever we need to kind of tighten up these seals on these joints. This here, maybe we unbolt it, pound this out so that it's flattened out good, and see what that surface looks like. It might just need a little piece of gasket material in there to help bite down and clamp down and seal it. We'll just see what it looks like and what it's going to take. And then same for all this down here. So we'll just kind of seal those things up. And while we have this stuff off, I'll get this part apart and see what it'll take to rebuild that. I think that's just going to be basically a simple half moon belly pan, basically, and we'll weld it back in. With those out of the way, we can check this, and with those out of the way, we can add material to the auger flighting and straighten out any of the flighting that's bent. And then we come over to the unloading auger. This portion is bent all to heck. It should be kind of dished out like this and have a scoop out here and a kind of a wide pan out here, so that when this moves, the discharge still drops into the same point. But for whatever reason, this has gotten bent, causing this to get bent also, because when you drop that auger, this comes up just in the pivot and rotation of things. So most of this is okay. We're going to straighten it out and kind of fix it up, get it all reshaped so that it fits the angles and dimension it should have. The auger flighting's pretty okay on this one, actually. There is one spot up here that's bent. I'll probably just try to straighten that out a little bit. The belly's got some rust in it down in here. There's one hole kind of starting there, so I don't know. We'll take a look at it. I'll probably pull the auger out because there's a few dents and dings in it here in the tube that are going to cause impact on the auger when it's rotating to discharge. And I got to see what this end looks like of the flighting. From here, it looks kind of okay, but then it looks like there's some random things welded on or something. I don't know. Gotta look at that and see. Pull the bearing off the end, and the auger will come out this end. This end has a bushing bearing like that. It just slips off in case it backs up somewhere here in the discharge or whatever. It gives it a place to basically push off and blow out. So that won't be too bad to fix up most of this. And then this auger here, obviously it's been patched up at the bottom here. And this is one of those things too, where it's like the grain comes up from the auger here, it's all filling up into this hopper. And as you unload, this window opens up for this hand crank, opening a window right here for this auger to fill and dump into the unloading auger. But if you don't, it's hard to clean out well, because even if you empty the hopper, there's still grain from here down that doesn't come over the top of this point. So there's grain in here. And then the auger, if there's any wear on that auger at all, this whole point here will be full of grain as it settles, because it won't be able to get it all out. And if it doesn't auger well through here, it'll still settle into this auger plate. So I think my intention here, we're going to peel this off. We'll cut this and clean this up, and then I'm going to probably do a hatch on this one. I'll rebuild new steel here, but then I'll probably put a cam latch on it and a hinge so that it can open up to make this easy to empty. That way I don't have grain sitting in here causing these rust cancer spots like this. Just like we have on the front of here. Now that window there is meant to come off so that you can clean out the grain in the bottom, so that that auger, the mixing auger, doesn't stay buried in there. And that mixing auger has been bent. It's worn pretty thin, so I'm going to have to get down inside there, add some flighting and material to that, and kind of build that up a little bit. And then this was yet another run it and watch it mode, right? You've got a concrete form spike jammed into here to keep that bevel gear engaged against down here to keep the unloading auger driving. And that's all because if you look down in here, well, there's only one bolt in the bearing flange. So the bearing can move. And my guess is that auger is probably bent, causing it to wobble. And it's probably lost a couple of bolts and then got under, while it was being used, under load, allowed it to move because it missed was a couple of bolts missing on that flange, allowed the auger to move, which then allowed it to bend, which is now in the predicament that it's in. There's some wire. Oh, that's how he's done it. Piece of wire wrapped around a concrete spike tied to the frame in an effort to keep that gear engaging. Rather than fixing it, you know, you could just put a couple bolts in it when they fell out and it wouldn't have been a problem. So we'll have a little bit of work there too. I'm gonna have to pull this bevel gear apart, pull that auger out. I think it's a floating auger at the top. Yeah. There's no bearing on the top, it just stands in there. So we'll pull that auger out and check it for Trough, see if it needs to be bent and straightened out. Otherwise, I think for the most part, she's okay. The knives look good. They don't have hardly any wear on them. They've got a little bit of rounding right here. They got a lot of life on them. They're reversible, so you can actually wear them 4 different times. So you can actually get 4 positions per knife as long as they don't wear too deep. So the hammers look good. The main sieve looks good, and then the hay sieve looks hardly used. We're probably going to set this grain mix up in a way that will work fine for all of our livestock. The barley, the wheat, the ratios will work fine. One big difference that we'll do is we won't include the mineral. We're going to grind this up without the salts, and then we will have salt available for the pigs as a free choice thing. And that way they can get as much mineral as they need and do that under free choice. And then we'll have just grains mixed up in here that we can feed that to the pigs. We can feed it to the chickens, turkeys. It can be fine for the cows and for the horses. And then we just have to make sure that we balance the portioning correctly for each animal so that we don't give them too much of something that they shouldn't eat very much of. I'm going to start just unbolting some stuff. Anything that'll unbolt will unbolt, and anything that won't will either cut bolts or whatever it takes. We'll start getting some things separated on here and lay out apart. See what it's going to take. Well, that's a good start. I got everything critical off that I needed to. Down inside of here is pretty well okay. Nothing too bad in there. The tube that goes across is all rotten. Holes and worn thin and patched over. So we'll rebuild that. The center section is all bad. And it is integral. It's a part of that tub. So I'm gonna have to just cut it off. Cut out all the cancer, build a new part, and weld it back onto that tub as if it were new. And then the other end, this had 4 layers of stuff bolted onto it, and it's just rotten completely. So I'll have to cut this one off down here and build a new plate to match this, and then build a new housing and then weld it all onto here. So it's got a new shoe on the bottom of that. We got this one exposed and out, and that one's gonna work out okay. I can cut it off here probably like 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch up maybe, just so there's a little bit of a weld seam there. Maybe we'll see if there's enough good material in that little corner. And like I said, I'm going to make a hatch so that that one can pop open easily and then just be cleaned out when it's done being used. Got the unloading auger out of the way. It wasn't too bad. It's over here. It's got a little bit of rolled flighting right here. And I'm sure that's from one of the dents that's in that portion of the tube. As it comes around, it's laying that flat. But otherwise, it's pretty good, except for that, where the bearing was spinning on the shaft and wore way down into it. I'll have to see what I can do about that. But the main delivery auger to the tub is in really rough shape. This end Flighting's all rusted through and folded over in several spots. Folded back. It gets that way when it gets thin, then it just folds back. So a bit of work on that one. If I can repair it, probably call on part to see if I can get a replacement and how much it would be. If I have to, I'll just weld it all up. If I have to, I'll buy it. It just depends on availability and price and time. And then I got to get down inside the tub and check the flighting down in there. And I know that one needs some rework and some welding because it's worn down pretty hard and folded over in a few spots where it's not making a clean sweep to the bottom. It should be making a full sweep to the bottom of the tub, lifting up, and it's not. There's like an inch or two gap. So it's good to know what we were dealing with though. Get some of these parts out so we can start fabbing them up. I'm going to start with these, our bolt-on components. This one is pretty rotten and bad. And the other one over here, those are two ends of the same auger tube. This one here is really rotten too. I'm going to set those up here on kind of a bench top height where I can cut off the old stuff, get things cleaned up and ground down to what they need to be, down to good clean metal, and basically spend a little time rebuilding them. So I'm drilling out the spot welds on this because I want to replace this sheet, but I don't want to have it stacked on top of the old sheet here with the new one. When I reline it, I don't want to have this bit of rusty, crusty stuff in there. I want to make sure I've got a good bond to this. I could cut that off and weld it next to it and weld it up. But anyway, that's what I'm doing, is I'm drilling through the spot weld and then using that on the inside edge as a pilot to then take away this sheet material out of that weld and break it loose without creating a giant hole that I have to deal with. Because you can see these spots are actually 1/4 inch, 5/16. They're pretty good sized spots. And I want to take that whole chunk of material out. The sheet that I picked up from the salvage yard is actually galvanized sheet, and I think it probably comes from one of the trailer manufacturers. We've got a couple of trailer manufacturing places here local that I think they probably use that as their body panels on the trailers. So then they weld that up and then they get everything a fresh coat. But that pre-galvanizing on the sheet metal helps keep it from rusting out, makes it last a lot longer, makes the paint last a lot longer. Then we got to figure out a way to manufacture a nice curve when we don't have things like a slip roll or a forming press or anything like that. We'll get creative and we'll get it shaped. Now that I got that cut off and flattened out, given the extra 1/2 inch that this height is that's still attached to this other piece for that edge, line it up here. I'm gonna mark it off and that'll be my cut for that. And then I'll make my length here as well. And I haven't mic'd it, but it's the same thickness. So it should work just fine. Yeah, it's a little bent, but I'll straighten most of that out just fine. All right. So at this point, I need to cut that out, straighten out this little bit of a dent from being in the salvage yard and get it kind of flattened a little bit more. And then I got to figure out how to curl it this way to fit this U-shaped saddle. Once I finish drilling out these spot welds, I'll have this plate ready, and I have the other U-shaped shoe part of it ready. So then I've got to that big sheet metal and try to get it bent into the radius. Now that's an 8-inch diameter auger, and I've got to try to make it a nice perfect U on that 8-inch radius, or 8-inch diameter. So been thinking about that for a while, how I was going to do that well. I think I have a plan. We'll move on to that in a minute, but let me finish drilling all these out. And I'm not drilling all the way through with this smaller bit. I'm just trying to create a pilot center to keep the larger bit where it needs to be. These are just tiny spot welds that hold this plate to the trough part, and some of that's actually drilling all the way just fine. And the point is not necessarily to drill down through like I just did on that hole, but just drill away the welded part that is where the two pieces are bonded, and it's just a tiny little spot. All of these holes are going to have to be filled back in. What it's going to effectively allow me to do is I'll put the new piece of metal against here, and then I'm basically going to end up plug welding each of these holes. So I'm hitting the material behind the hole and starting the weld, and then it swells out and spreads into the circumference of the small hole and fills in the hole. The other side, the spot welds were a little bit larger, like they had, I don't know, had the welder turned up higher or something. So I ended up having to drill them initially with the small hole like this, and then change to a bigger bit to get it drilled out enough to release. So that side has a little bit bigger holes, but so that'll rest right up into there. And then, like I said, I can plug weld these holes. I'll clamp that all in place, and then I'll plug weld these holes to reattach it, and then that will leave me with a nice new trough. So I've got this all marked out for the center, and this part is, it bends till here, and then from there it's straight walled. So this will be straight, start to curve, center the curve, stop curving, and be straight. So this is kind of like my walls and then the curve. Now I need to make a way to bend this across an 8-inch circle so that it will end up with a nice even radius. If that doesn't have a nice, pretty perfect curve to it, as that auger spins, it's going to hit either a high spot or a low spot. If it's a little disformed or shaped like this, that auger is not going to set into there right, and it's going to rub and it's going to ride off or put pressure on the auger instead of setting down into the nice little trough. I think I've got a plan figured out that's going to make this work okay. I found a nice chunk of 6-inch diameter pipe that I had in my junk pile, and I'm going to try to bend this sheet metal over that 6-inch pipe. It's an 8-inch diameter circle that I'm going for, but when you bend this sheet metal, it wants to spring back and come back. So I'm hoping that maybe if I'm in this, I think that's about 6-inch, that I can kind of overbend it so that it springs back and opens back out to that 8-inch size. So what I'm going to try to do is try to maybe clamp one end and or weld one end so that I can slide that sheet metal into here to hold it. If it was shorter and much narrower, then I would probably just clamp on both ends. I'm going to see if I can figure that out real quick. Hopefully I have enough weight between the weight of this pipe and myself that I can lay it against the floor here and kind of roll it up like a sleeping bag and be able to use the ground as leverage to hold it against the pipe as I roll and bend it. I think I'm going to just try to spot weld this rectangle tubing on this end over here, and then just use a pair of vice grips to clamp that end, so that will give me a little bit of leeway when it comes to getting that sheet metal in and out. We'll try it, we'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll adjust and change plans. Well, maybe that works. As long as that holds. Okay. Can we be that lucky? Jeez. Okay. That actually worked. So you can see this needed to be straight to the line and then start the curve, which it's done. It started bending right at the line, made the full wrap around, and stopped bending at the other line, which it managed to do just right. Now, yeah, it's a little bit closed, but it's pretty easy to open this up and have it come pretty well straight. All right, I think that actually worked better than I expected. I knew it would be pretty okay, but I think that's pretty damn good. So you can see, I need to work that a little bit more open, but you can see, well, that's awful close to right where it needs to be. I can pull that against and clamp it and get everything tight as I go, starting from the center here. I can cinch it down with a clamp and then be able to work it around to open it up. But before I do that, I think I want to try to just open it up naturally. You can kind of see the gap that's there. So if I open it up naturally so that I actually have to pull it in just slightly, then it will be better. Boy, that turned out nicely. Holy cow. That's easy to work with there. Oh yeah, look at that. Just a little push in. Bang. For some reason that's been really weighing on me, how I was going to get this and do it well. I don't have a slip roll. That would be great, but I don't have one, don't have access to one. So I'm just trying to get creative about how we get this done. And sometimes that's just the answer. You just got to get creative. Be willing to be creative about it and try, and know that it may not work, but you never know what you figure out until you try once. Heck yeah. I'm even surprised that I got it lined up as well as I did, because like, it's not, I didn't get it crooked when I bent it, so it's like straight. All right, probably do that one first so I can kind of line everything up and might be able to clamp it a little bit better in a few spots. Okay, so maybe I will start with welding that after I grind this inside. And probably ought to do this one too. Clean that up, wire wheel them at least or something. Clean those up good. Make sure that's on. If I can get that any closer in there or not. Might get it one more. Let's see, this way. Just got a little bit of a lip there that kind of come from grinding and cutting that with a grinder. So I'll take the wheel and put that nice and flat. So I just got all those pieces cut out. This thing really isn't all that bent up, but I know from experience on these kind of rolled edges, when they've bent and pulled, what ends up happening is that rolled edge gets stretched, and it's just impossible to get it to come back together and regain any kind of stiffness and rigidity. And it's rippled all around here. Every side has got at least one point of contact that way. It's probably not that critical, but I have the sheet steel, it's the right thickness, and I have the means to lay it out and cut it. So I thought, as simple as this box is, it would just be simpler to lay out the patterns and cut new pieces for that. There's just not that much work involved there, and I can have nice, clean, straight lines with good, rigid, rolled edges instead of this other problem. So I'm gonna go ahead with it that way. I got a good friend that's got a small handbrake that I can, I just checked with him and it's sized big enough to be able to handle this thickness. So I'm gonna run those over to his place tomorrow and we'll get them bent so they're like they ought to be. And then I just got a couple more pieces to finish here. I need this rear support plate. Now this is a much thicker sheet here and it's welded across the back. I've got some thicker sheet stock over there that I'll cut that out of. And then this is the strap portion that kind of, it's welded in, but it's kind of acts as like the seam cover for where this bolts up to the other piece, etc. So I need the strap piece, the end plate, and then the little horseshoe saddle here for the, or the tunnel, whatever you want to call it, the tube for the tube for the auger or whatever. So a couple more pieces to build for this and then I'll have everything ready for it. But tomorrow I'll go bend these and then we can attach them up, and they just used bead welds on the overlap. So I'm probably just going to do exactly the same rather than trying to do mini spot welds or anything like that like I did on the other one. I think it'll just be simpler in the long run for this part to weld it up like it's been welded. So yeah, a few more pieces there to build here and we'll have this one all set. But we are getting there.